Hi, everyone. Welcome to the TCC Trinity River Off the Page podcast, brought to you by the editorial team of the Roots and Reflections magazine. I'm Brendan Lane. I'm an editor. I'm also a graphic designer and budding artist here at Trinity River.
I'm Jinelle. I'm a first-year editor on the Roots and Reflections magazine.
I'm Cypress. I'm also an editor on the magazine, and I practice photography.
Today, we'll be talking about submissions, what can make or break a piece, the difference in processes between art and writing, how they're accepted, as well as what you can do to make your submission more successful. Let's get into it. So what was y'all's experience whenever it came to accepting submissions as a group?
I think it was a really different experience than anything we've done before, because I think there were so many different people in the class and they all had different ideas, what they liked, what they didn't like. And so I've always been the kind of person that doesn't really want to step on anybody's shoes. I don't want to make anybody feel bad for what they thought. So it was really weird being okay, well, I like this piece or I don't like this piece, but I really only want to say it for those and just not affect anybody else. And I was those are the two that I really want to get out there. If not, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I definitely get you on that, because it was definitely an experience for me. I haven't had any previous background in copy editing or photo editing for that matter. So if I saw something that I really liked on the board and I would read it out loud and be like, wow, that's really cool. Other people would find the really technical grammatical errors in it, and they'd be like, I don't think it flows together. I'd be like, oh, that's interesting, because I did not catch that. So I thought it was really cool that other people couldn't bring their previous background knowledge into something and just apply it. Mm-hmm. So it was really cool to see other students perspective on things.
I 100% agree. I was a little taken aback whenever I first came in, because there was pieces I would read and I was like, wow, this is really interesting. I love the meaning behind this. This is fantastic. And then somebody would mention, maybe it was a little contrived. Maybe there was something that didn't particularly flow well. It would really stick out to me. Sometimes I would find myself getting a little frustrated because sometimes I felt like a piece really should have get in, and then other times I felt this is probably not the highest quality work. But it was really interesting working with a lot of people with a lot of different backgrounds. I got to learn a lot, not just from my fellow editors, but what people are looking for whenever it comes to both literary and artworks.
And I feel it was cool because nothing was just stuck. Nobody was okay, we're getting this piece just like that. We all talked about it. And so there were some pieces that maybe somebody else really, really loved and somebody else didn't quite see the meaning of it. But then they would still this one would talk about why they loved it so much, what made it special. And then this person was oh, okay. That's, I see it now. I like this piece more now because of you. So it was just really nice. We had that back and forth, and nobody's idea was just set in stone. Everyone kind of talked about it.
Mm-hmm. All right. So what is a questionable piece, and what was it like handling it as a group?
Right. So a questionable piece is something that kind of half the class decided yes and half the class decided no. So like we said before, we'd all just talk about it and give our little opinions on it and see if we can kind of come to an agreement. So yeah, we'd just all give our opinion on it and see how can we move forward with this, and how can we decide whether or not it should be in the magazine.
Mm-hmm. I feel it kind of goes through with what we said earlier. There's everybody had so many different opinions. There were some that were this piece has some things I don't really know about it, and there were others that were totally no, this is great, we should go for it. So I think a lot of it just kind of went down to talking about it, being all right, this is why we think this, or this is why we think this. But I think also at the end of the day, the magazine was for the majority, right? So we had to go. Some people didn't all agree with what got in, what didn't, but at the end of the day, we had to go with what most people were all right, this is good.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes the questionable nature of the piece had nothing to do with how good the writing was. In fact, sometimes these pieces were fantastic, but sometimes we were a little bit worried about the nature or the content of the piece, because something might have been mentioned that might have been triggering, or something that is not a topic that's talked about too much. Oftentimes we would just leave it to a blind vote, just to see where we were at.
Right. I also felt we had to see know our audience too, because like you said, being inclusive and having different points of views in the magazine was also really important, because this is a college magazine, so you kind of have to apply it to everybody. So Yeah, it's pretty interesting.
So what did y'all do if you really wanted to support a piece?
I think honestly, you just really have to say that you like it and why. Because like I said before, I feel like it was kind of casual. Like everyone was kind of talking about what they liked, what they didn't, instead of like being a really stiff meeting or anything like that. So if you wanted a piece to get in, you just kind of had to convince everybody else in the class to be like, hey, this is a good piece. Like I really like it. You should like it too. And then that's kind of just how we like went along with it. Was if enough people liked it, they were like, okay, then this is good. We can put it in.
Yeah, there was a term that I really liked. It was called championing a piece. And one of the things I did personally, there was a few writing pieces where I was like, oh, this is so fantastic. I love the content of this. So I intentionally went out of my way to basically express my desire to have this in and the contents of it. And even if there was, because sometimes there was opposition, even if there was opposition, I would still kind of express my desire for this piece to get in. And other people would do the same. It didn't always work, but really championing a piece, you're just trying your best to get it in there.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. I really recommend like just giving your opinion on why you like it, and even like going into more detail to like specifics to like really push it through.
Mm-hmm. Next up, we're going to talk about the difference between writing and art submissions, because the processes are a little different than you're probably expecting.
Okay, so what was the process of accepting writing submissions?
So it was actually a really involved process. It took us weeks to do it, because, there's only so much writing you can go through before, like, your brain just turns to mush. Heck, sometimes your brain just turns to mush about halfway through. And it's not to say that any of the writing pieces were hard to read. It was just more of, there was just so much content, there was so much to look at. And then we had a little rubric paper that we used collectively as a class to kind of figure out how we felt about it. We talked about the universality, which is, how relatable the experience was. We talked about the clarity. We talked about if it subverted expectations. And in the case of like structure, we talked about plot. I swear I think it took about 6 or 7 weeks before we got through everything. I must have reread some of these poems about 10 times to get the point, but that's because I'm pretty novice at poetry. Sometimes I would just sit in a Discord call for like 10 minutes with my friends just to refresh my brain, turn off the Discord call, read some of it, and then get back on. And it was just a constant process like that.
Yeah, definitely agree with you. So was there like a difference between the writing and the art submissions, do you think?
Yes. And we'll talk more about the art submissions in a bit, but the writing, we were looking for more quality. And we were trying to look for essentially someone who really understood what they were writing. Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like you really said everything. Yeah. Like, yeah.
Okay, so what was the process of accepting art submissions?
I feel like the art process was like way more subjective than like the writing one. Because at least with the writing, like we kind of had like that rubric, like, all right, this is what we're looking for, stuff like that. But with the art, it was really just like, do I like it or do I not? Like there wasn't really anything that we could do. It was just like kind of like everybody's little opinion. And so since there wasn't a system, that made it a little hard because we couldn't like collectively be like, okay, well, we all see that this is one thing, so like that's what we did. So it was kind of more so like, did it make us feel something? Did it make the majority of the class feel something? And then we'll see if we're put it in.
Yeah, one of the biggest notes I would say in terms of the difference between the two is that, like, with writing, someone could write about a subject you really don't care for, but the writing could be beautiful and you could still be like, okay, I guess that's pretty good. Whereas with art, it's one of those things, because it's a visual thing, when there's something that doesn't quite jive with you, and it doesn't mean the piece is bad at all. It's just like my thing is violence. Whenever it comes to pieces that have a little bit more of a violent narrative, I typically shy away from that. I'm not much for collages either. But I know some people love that kind of stuff. So there's a lot more subjectivity.
And I think it's also like even like colors and stuff was like a big thing. So it was like the art style maybe wasn't like your thing, or like maybe it had like colors and you're like, oh, I kind of like a more minimalist, or like the opposite. And so everyone just kind of like had their own opinions. And so I remember like when we first started going, it was kind of hard because it was just like everything was listed. And then it was like, okay, what do you like? What do you not? And then everybody was like all over. So that's why I had to like really talk about it. Because nobody could just be like, okay, this is what we're going with.
Yeah, it's funny because we had like a discussion. I remember it was one of our first assignments to do in the art class. We had to like go put together art pieces we did like and didn't like and list the reasons why. Mm-hmm. And I remember because one of mine was that little circle thing that I see everywhere. It's like really famous. It's just like a white piece of paper and then like a big red circle in the middle. Uh-huh. So, yeah, I was like, okay. I don't understand it, but someone else might think it was really cool. So.
Yeah.
And in terms of time taken, it would like I mentioned the writing submissions. That took about 6 or 7 weeks. We did this in like a week, and it was like 2 days of work. Because you can go through a lot more art, and it's one of those things where you look at it and if it makes you feel something, it's like pow. Whereas if it doesn't, then you just kind of look it over. Mm-hmm. And that's just kind of the nature of art. Whereas writing, you don't really know what you're getting into until you really get into the meat of it.
Yeah.
So the process was a lot faster. That doesn't mean we didn't spend time on it, though.
We definitely spent time on it.
But that's actually, I liked that. Alrighty, it's the time you've all been waiting for. It's advice about submissions.
So just to start things off, what was it like just getting over the initial hurdle of like submitting your work?
Honestly, I was a little terrified, but more so my friends that did submit, they were actually more terrified than I was. And the advice I just give them is just do it. That even if the deadline is coming up, you haven't, gotten it copy edited properly, you haven't fixed the image, just submit what you can. While it's preferable that you get more stuff, get your stuff together, get good pictures, get it copy edited, all these different kind of things. It's just better to submit and at least be there, because an editor of a literary magazine can always come back and be like, hey, can you fix this? Or they might have someone on their team that's able to do so.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you because it's something like so personal, and it's like a little piece of you that you're submitting for other people to judge. And so yeah, I feel like just doing it, like you said, is a really good idea.
Yeah, I think I've never like submitted my writing ever. Like I've always been the kind of person like I'll write something down, but like nobody reads it, nothing like that. So it was definitely like a big like hurdle, just kind of be like, okay, pressing the submit button, here we go. But like I feel like that's really the hardest part, just like pressing that button and doing it. But after that, it really wasn't that bad. Mm-hmm. So I feel like you definitely make it worse in your mind. So like you said, just submit. Like that makes it so much easier.
Just do it.
So what advice would you guys give to people who are submitting their work?
Definitely take them to the writing center.
Yeah, TCC, all of our campuses have a writing center, and they can help you copy edit different papers and whatnot. If you're not a TCC student and you're listening to this, then I either recommend hiring a copy editor or just having a few friends that are a little bit more English inclined to look over it for you. One of the biggest things we looked at when we were looking at the writing submissions is how legible the piece was, because sometimes if some of the grammar was misplaced or some of the lines were a little bit harder to understand, the sentence structure, sometimes we kind of lost some meaning, and some of those pieces didn't get in. Saying that, if it's just a minor mistake here and there, it's not too bad. Like I said, if it's a battle between getting your stuff copy edited on time and just submitting it, I would rather you just submit it. But if you have the time and you have the ability, please copy edit your work, because it'll just, that little extra polish will make it slide right into the magazine a lot smoother.
So we talked about a little bit about like the writing submissions and stuff like that, but as for art submissions, what advice would you have specific to that?
As we mentioned earlier, just do it. There's a lot more subjectivity whenever it comes to art, I feel like, as both an artist and someone who just loves reading literature, that, you know, there could be a really good piece of literature, it just might not jive with you, but it'll still get published, it'll still get in. Whereas an art piece, if it's just not hitting those marks with most of the people in there, it's just not going to get in. So I would honestly just recommend submit whatever you've got. Don't worry so much about the tone of your piece, because maybe the editor team has a different idea in mind that you could not possibly comprehend. The other thing is just editing your pieces. So if it's like a photography piece, just raise that brightness, you know, set up that contrast, make sure it looks presentable. If it's like a digital piece, clean up some of the lines, do what you can to make it as presentable as possible before submitting.
Yeah, and as for like the art pieces, it's a very good idea to make sure you have like a good picture of your artwork. Especially like there's no glares or like little specks or anywhere. Like a good picture is very important.
Oh yeah, our team was lucky enough to have Photoshop editors on it, and there was some pieces that had some glares, and some of them were even so rough that we had to actually ask the people who submitted if they could send in another picture entirely. It was pretty funny, because you just see this beautiful artwork and then you're like, why is there a giant sun mark here? But yeah, just edit your pieces, take good pictures, get it as ready as you possibly can, because some teams, they may have editors, some teams, they may just, if it doesn't look good right there, they just may not accept it. Thank you all for tuning in to our Off the Page episode, Laying the Foundation. We hope you enjoyed listening and learned a lot about the submission process.
Tune in next episode to deep dive into art of the magazine and an insider view into the layout selection process with Alejandro and Elizabeth.
Be sure to follow us on our social media at Roots and Reflections to stay up to date with our episodes and get some behind the scenes footage.
See you on the river.